Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "We have art in order not to die from reality." This might seem like an exaggeration, but is it really? How much of your day do you devote to watching television or reading a book or scrolling through social media to find something that sparks an emotional response? Listening to music? All of these are forms of art, and it's impossible to imagine life without them. For this podcast, I plan to talk to creative people from all mediums about their creative process, and also about why and how creativity is important to the culture of America. Welcome to the Song of Roland, American Culture at Full Volume, where we turn everything up to 11.
I first came to Washington, D.C. when I was with the Department of Interior back right after 9/11. And I was the Deputy Director for the Bureau of Indian Affairs Law Enforcement. But after 9/11, the Director for the Department's Law Enforcement program reached out to me and asked me to come back on detail to help protect the nation's dams, icons, and monuments. At the time, I told him, I'm not really a physical security specialist. And he said, you're the only former FBI agent in the Department of Interior, and I want to tell the Secretary we got an former FBI agent working on this. So I ended up back to DC on a detail for 6 months. It turned into 2 years. Then I retired in 2005, and I went ahead and just stayed on here. So I had a break. My wife and I moved out to New Mexico for a period of time for her job. Moved back here 10 years ago, so I've been here for 10 years in Alexandria, Virginia.
That's interesting that you were the only FBI agent in the BIA.
In the Department of the whole of the Department of Interior, not just.
Wow, that is amazing. Walter Lamar was teaching shop at Browning High School when two FBI agents showed up to ask why he hadn't completed the application he picked up a few months earlier. This visit changed the trajectory of Walter's life in a big way, as over the next 20 years he worked on such cases as the Green River Killer, the Zodiac Killer, and most importantly, the events in Waco and the Oklahoma City bombing. He was the first agent to identify Timothy McVeigh as a primary suspect. But surprisingly, that was not the moment he treasures most during his long and distinguished career. You moved around a lot as a kid and also in your career. How do you think that shaped you as a person? I mean, a lot of people struggle with moving around a lot, but other people kind of learn to adapt. And
Russell, that's a good question, and it's for me kind of an interesting question because I was a BIA brat. My mom was a BIA social worker, so for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, she was a social worker. So I was born in Oklahoma. We moved back to Browning, Montana when I was only months old. Lived there for a time, and my father worked for my grandfather was a deputy sheriff of Glacier County, Montana, and got my dad doing some police work. He took to that, enjoyed it, liked it very much. Ended up putting in for a job on the Wind River Reservation as the chief of police. So he became a chief of police at Wind River, and we first moved to Wind River. I was probably 2 years old. We were there until I was in the third grade, and we went to Hickory Apache. And then from Hickory Apache, we went to Albuquerque at Southern Pueblo's agency, and then the Navajo Nation for 6 years, and then to Oklahoma Indian Country, and that's where my dad is from. He's a Wichita from Oklahoma, and I'm Blackfeet from Montana. But oddly enough, I used to look forward to the opportunity to move. To me, there was nothing more exciting than hitting the ground and running around the neighborhood or the agency looking for houses where there was a bike laying out front or there was some evidence that there was another kid there, and then finding a new friend. For me, it was, I kind of took to that whole idea of living in different places. And as a native, it was, you have an opportunity then to be part of, and this too is, I think, kind of interesting and kind of important, as I remember sitting with the lady who looked after us on the Wind River. Her name was Winnie Big Road, and we were at Winnie's house. I was at Winnie's house. I have 3 younger sisters, but I was the one who got invited to go there, and I was on a weekend. And we're sitting all around the wall, the exterior walls of the living room, obviously on the interior, but situated in that way. So it always kind of made me think about it now as I think back. Is like sometimes our native homes were almost like a teepee, right? Everybody sits around next to the wall not in a circle, but in a circle. And on this wall, there's all the pictures of the family that was in the military, the graduation pictures and everything else. And then on this wall, there is a single velveteen painting of JFK.
Wow.
Yeah, and everybody's smoking and they got a cigarette, and the screen door would open, and it's that, the unmistakable sound of a screen door spring. It would slam shut. The smoke, there'd be a ripple in the smoke in there, and they were passing around some elk jerky, and I was a persnickety kid. But
oh, really?
They're like, go ahead, well, have some of that. Well, at the time, my nickname was King, and so they'd say, come on, King, have a. And I just finally nibbled on the elk jerky, but I realized that I was in this very special place, and I'm hearing this conversation, this adult conversation. And they're talking about different things on the reservation. They're talking about, and there were some things that you could tell the tone of their voice would change when they're talking about something ceremonial. And I felt, even as a 8-year-old kid, I felt very blessed to be in that circle, and I felt like I belonged, and I could be comfortable, but not too comfortable. That makes any sense. And that was kind of how my whole life ended up, is that I was in places where I felt comfortable, I felt like I belonged, but I could never be too comfortable because it wasn't my home. And so at Wind River, I loved living there. We, like I said, left there in the 3rd grade at Hickory Apache. It was once again an opportunity to have near and dear friends as a kid that I played Little League ball with, and that whole thing, but also got to hear about their ceremonies and hear about what their culture was about. Not so much in Albuquerque, because even though we were there for the Southern Pueblos Agency, I was in Albuquerque. So I gotta say, it was a very weird time, because before that, we always lived on the agency grounds. We lived in a government house. We had government furniture. And this was the first time that we had furniture that didn't have a government property sticker on it. And I was very confused about that whole thing. I'm like, what the heck's going on here? Where's the property stickers? Where's the government, U.S. government, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of a thing. But then when we moved out to the Navajo reservation, once again, I had an opportunity to participate in some cultural things. So I feel like I am at home at a lot of different places. And it was because I was around a lot. And then in Oklahoma, getting to be with the Wichita people, our people, was that whole other experience of being with the grandmas and the aunties and around that culture. So I feel like I have a very kind of a complex Native identity, but an interesting and fun and important Native identity.
Yeah. Well, not only do you have a lot of different tribal connections in your blood, but you've lived on so many different reservations that must have been really valuable as preparation for your later career at the Department of Interior and the BIA.
It was, and my father ended up being a nationally recognized tribal leader. So I had an opportunity to hear a lot of dinner talk about issues relating to Indian country across the board, because he was a nationally recognized leader. He was involved in a National Congress of American Indians. He was involved in the National Indian Health Board. He was involved at the Indian Housing Council and so on. So we would hear those discussions at dinner and had a familiarity with those issues across Indian country.
So was there any kind of specific series of incidents or events that led to you being interested in law enforcement?
Well, my grandfather was a longtime deputy sheriff in Glacier County, Montana, on the Blackfeet Reservation that encompasses the Blackfeet Reservation. And my dad was in law enforcement. He was the chief of police at Wind River, and then went on to, he was a deputy sheriff in Fremont County, Wyoming, and he loved law enforcement. But I graduated college, and I had an industrial arts degree, because all through high school I was either working on a construction crew or auto mechanicking, and in my early days on the Navajo reservation, and I was pumping gas. So I worked in service stations, I worked in construction crews, and I will say I was pretty damn handy. I could fix things, make things, and I really enjoyed that. So when I ended up on the Blackfeet Reservation in the late 70s, I was a shop teacher. It was during that time my dad and mom invited me down to the National Congress of American Indians in Albuquerque, and I was like, okay, what the heck, I'll fly down there and spend a little bit of time with my folks and go to the conference and see a lot of friends and people I knew. As soon as I got there, my dad hustled me right into the vendor arena, and there's hundreds of booths of all shapes, sizes, and government recruitment, selling beadwork. I mean, it was as the vendor areas are in these big conferences, and there was the FBI recruiting booth, right straight to the booth. There was a big tall Comanche guy, dressed in a suit. There was a Navajo fella dressed in a suit, and they talked to me and said, "Well, are you?" And they're joking around, of course. And they're like, "Oh, so you want to be an FBI agent?" I said, "Well, I had never really thought about it." And they said, "Well, you look like you might be in decent shape. You have a college degree. Are you willing to move?" I said, "Yeah, I'm willing to move." They said, "Well, you might be a perfect candidate for it." So they handed me an application. It's like this big old thick application, and so rolled it up, put it in my back pocket, and we went on to the conference. And there was this kind of an excitement at that time. So there was all these photographs in the booth, agents doing all these different things, and you can imagine it's just pure excitement. And there's two native guys that are FBI agents. Who the hell knew there's native guys in the FBI, right? And that's one of the things that's kind of interesting and kind of a dynamic, is that we don't often have, and I say we, natives, we don't often have an Uncle Bob who's an FBI agent, and Aunt Betty who's an FBI agent, neighbor Bill who's an FBI agent. We don't see those folks as we don't have those role models that are there for us day in and day out. I see these two guys, and it intrigued me, and I thought, what the heck, that's amazing, two native FBI guys. So I go back to Browning. I took the application out one night and started to fill it out, and it's like, who is your first grade teacher? What's her address? And I'm thinking, what the heck? This is a fool's errand. I mean, there's not a chance in hell that I'd probably ever end up actually getting into the FBI, so this is a waste of time. 2 weeks later, a couple agents showed up at the school, and the principal comes down to my shop class, and he's like, whoa, FBI's here. They want to talk to you. And I'm like, holy cripes, what have I done? And I start trying to rethink the past weeks and months, and did I do anything? Am I going to get arrested for something? Principal, he's wondering who's going to take over the shop class after I get arrested. And I go down, and they're like, well, you were at this conference a couple of weeks back, and you talked to a couple of agents, and they handed you an application, and they obviously feel like you're a good candidate, or they wouldn't have asked us to come out here and ask you to get the application filled and submitted. So they said, get it done. If there's something that that you can't get filled out, don't worry about it, but just bring it down. And so a week or so later, I went down to the resident agency in Cut Bank and handed over the application. Ended up testing and did well on the written test, and then did interview and did well, and then went to the academy. And it was weird. And weird's not even the right word for it, but I'm in this classroom, and there's 26 of us in this class. As they go around through the introductions, it's like I'm, the previous assistant attorney general from the state of Delaware. I'm from law firm such and such. So there was a lot of attorneys, because there was at one time, Hoover wanted to hire only attorneys and accountants. So there was probably more attorneys and accountants in the class than anything else. There was one rocket scientist.
Wow.
And then there was a shop teacher, a Blackfeet shop teacher from Browning, Montana. And when I stood up and introduced myself, I know eyes were on me, and they're looking at me thinking, don't get attached to this guy because he won't be around long. And the second day there, I went out and I found a place, and it was in February, and it was cold out. I crawled in a pile of leaves and covered myself up and cried like a baby. And
wow.
I thought there's this isn't for me. This is a fool's errand. What am I doing here? And not to sound hokey or anything else, but those voices from the past came to me. My grandfather Ed Gobert from Blackfeet Reservation, Mountain Chief, who was my great uncle. My grandma's from on the Wichita side. I saw their faces, I heard their voices, and it gave me the strength to get up, get out of that pile of leaves, go back in, and to get it done.
Wow.
I ended up not to be bragging, but I ended up graduating at the very top of my class in academics, firearms, and physical fitness.
Wow.
Went to my first FBI in San Diego, and the very first time I went out, I realized that was the job that I was supposed to have.
Oh, really? You just fell right into it. That's really cool. Well, talk about you were at Waco.
So I served in the FBI in San Diego and San Francisco. I did a stint in Seattle working on the Green River murder case.
Oh.
I ended up I wanted to go to Oklahoma. That was what they call your office of preference, and I put that down as where I wanted to end up. So I finally got my transfer, and I'm thinking, going from San Francisco, where I was working bank robberies, 4 bank robberies a day sometimes, really active, a lot going on. Then I'm going to go to Oklahoma City, and I'm thinking Sleepy Hollow. It's going to be, it turned out my FBI career in Oklahoma was anything but.
Yeah.
And February 28th, the shootout at Waco happened. And it was, televised across the country, and everybody can, old enough can remember seeing the ATF agents on the roof and bullets coming through the roof, and this incredibly dramatic firefight that was going on. 4 ATF agents were killed. So I was on a SWAT team in Oklahoma, and we were immediately mobilized and sent down to Waco. And we're at one point when we first get there, we're in a hangar, and there was probably another couple of hundred agents that were there by then. And they told us that they had two 50 caliber sniper rifles in the compound. They told us that McVeigh had suggested that there were explosives that were planted around the perimeter of the compound. So they had called up.
So just to clarify, Timothy McVeigh was there, right?
So did I say McVeigh or Koresh?
Yeah, you said McVeigh, but
okay,
so you're
sorry.
talking about Koresh. You're talking about Koresh, okay?
Yeah. So to regress a little bit, because I did mention McVeigh, McVeigh actually was there. He was there
right.
in a parking lot. He was selling bumper stickers and such in a parking lot. So he was there. But so Koresh had said, and excuse
right.
me for that.
That's all right.
But he said so. There's explosives around the compound. So we're told that they've ordered up these Bradley fighting vehicles from Fort Hood for that reason, to protect us from the 50 cals, to protect us from these explosives. They asked if for people who had tracked vehicle experience. Well, I'd operated a dozer at one time for a very short period of time, but I'm thinking if a 19-year-old kid can learn how to drive these things, and certainly a college-educated FBI agent could, so I raised my hand. They also told us that the only place that would sustain a direct hit from a 50 cal was the driver's compartment in a Bradley. So I'm thinking, okay, that's the safest place to be. So I ended up being a Bradley tank driver, and we were a medevac tank. So we had a Secret Service medic in our tank, and what we were supposed to do is if anybody was injured, either Davidian or law enforcement, then we'd roll up in the tank, drop the ramp. The doctors and guys on the tank would pull in whoever was injured, and then we'd take off. So that was what my mission was. And April the 19th of 1993 came, and there was a lot of discussion about, leading up to that, a lot of discussion about what was going to happen, and so there's obviously a lot of controversy about that day and what happened at the compound and why. But there was a cartoon a 4-panel cartoon that came out right after the compound had burnt down. And in this 4-panel, in the first panel, it's a guy in a reclining chair, and he's looking at the newspaper. Day 1, he says, "Someone must end this insanity." Day 12, he's in the same recliner chair looking at a newspaper. He said, "Something's got to be done." Day 42, "Come on, end this thing." Day 51, "What a mistake. They should have waited it out." To me, that described in detail and encapsulated what that whole thing was about. It was without a script, without any kind of precedent, where you have a guy who believes he's Jesus Christ and he's got his followers, this cult in this compound, in this building, with automatic weapons and all kinds of ammunition that's holed up. And after being there for 50 days, it's the public is just like in that cartoon panel. The public saying, "Hey, something's got to happen. It's costing a ton of money." So they came up with a plan, and it was a very thoughtful plan. And I actually got a chance to talk to some of the folks that were working on it. It was what it seemed like a good plan until it wasn't. And then the compound burned down, and I ended up with our team. We were down there, one of the first teams that was down to the burned out compound, and we knew that there uh, were 25 kids that perished right there. As I stood there that day, surrounded by the smell of death, then as a native, I had some tobacco, and I put some tobacco down and said a prayer for those 25 kids. And so it was a very difficult thing to see and to be exposed to. And then following that we were deemed baby killers, jackbooted thugs, Gestapo, um, liars. I mean, that thing. In fact, my daughter at the time, probably around 8 years old or so, after I'd come home, she said, because she knew that some of the agents I worked with, and she named their names, and then she said, and you, Dad, she said, are you a liar? Because I've always told them, that we don't lie. And I said, honey, I said, there's few people who know the truth, and I'm one of them. And anyway, that was a tough time. Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about what it was like afterward. Did you go through a difficult period emotionally after witnessing something so horrific?
You know, Russell, that too is a kind of an interesting question, and I probably will suggest that I don't have necessarily a good answer to it, but after the 30th anniversary, which has just passed of the Oklahoma City bombing, I've done some reflection and thinking about all of this, and when you have a job to do, you have to continue to focus, and you have to continue to focus and move ahead. Well, I was hunting fugitives. I was working on a violent gangs task force. I didn't have the luxury and time to be able to take a break and think about, what are my feelings? How am I feeling? Do I have PTSD? Do I have whatever? I mean, it's just, you don't have that time. You just got to move ahead and keep doing what you do. So I did.
Yeah, of course, that makes a lot of sense. And then how many years later was the bombing? And it was the same day, right?
2 years on April the 19th of 1995. On April 19th, 1995, and that was part of there was a number of reasons. There was a number of reasons that McVeigh had chosen that date, and probably a key reason was because of Waco. Part of the reason was because of the Turner Diaries and the reference to April the 19th in the Turner Diaries. There was a guy named Snell who was uh, supposed to be, I think, maybe even executed on the 19th. So there was a number of the 19th just played a kind of a real target date for McVeigh for a number of reasons. And so yeah, it was April the 19th in 1995, 2 years later. So April the 19th in 1995, I uh, in actuality, for a period of time, I also served as a recruiter for the FBI. The FBI was surging up in numbers, and they also wanted to be able to recruit and to try to increase the numbers of natives in the FBI, which was a woefully small number of agents in the FBI. So that was my job, was to help try to increase those numbers. And I was on my way to Albuquerque, and I was loading up my car with some recruitment materials, with my luggage, and I was going to drive to Albuquerque to a conference. And as I was loading the car, I felt and heard the explosion. I hustled back in the house, For some reason, I thought it was a sonic boom, but I turned on the television just real quickly, and I saw it right then, immediately, the plume of smoke. Already they were talking about some kind of explosion at the federal building. So I'm thinking, not knowing what it is for sure, but I'm thinking they're going to need any kind of help that they can get. And because I was an FBI agent and I could get through the perimeter and get in there, I felt like I better go. So I put up a red light and siren and headed that way. So I was red light and siren down to the federal building, and I got there, and I first saw the Journal Record, which was just to the north of the federal building. I thought, well, holy cow, they made a mistake. It must have been there because of all the damage I saw at the Journal Record. Then I came around the corner and I saw the federal building, and it was almost too much to even comprehend to see.
I bet. So
at the federal building, and I'll go back to even earlier that morning when I woke. The first thing I thought about and I said a prayer for were the 25 children at Waco, having absolutely no idea what was going to unfold for me that day. But that was the start of my day, was waking up and thinking about those 25 kids. So I'm jumping my car, race down there. I'm there. I'm at the front of the building. There's an FBI agent there, and it turns out it's the same guy that was in the recruiting booth in Albuquerque.
Wow.
Big tall Comanche guy, and he was our SWAT team commander. And so he said, you need to go around to the back side of the building and see if they need any help back there. And I went back around, and I saw an agent from one of the other federal agencies, and he said, we still have people in there. He said, what should we do? I said, well, we go in and try to get them. And I went in, and I was talking to him, saying, we've got to watch out. There might be still gas being poured into the building from the natural gas lines and ruptured lines and electricity, and we got to be careful. And I'm talking to this guy, and I turn around and look, and he wasn't there.
Oh,
he didn't come in the building, and it took me 28 years to kind of get upset with him. And as I was preparing for these interviews and stuff for the documentaries, I thought about it, and I thought, he let me go in there by myself. I didn't have a radio. If something would have fallen on me, if I would have broken my leg, if I'd have gotten injured in some way, something would have happened to me. I was on my own. He'd let me in there on my own, which took me 28 years to get a little irritated with the guy. But anyway, I go in and I'm searching, and I end up on the 9th floor, and there was an ATF agent who was trapped up there. And we're shouting his name. There was a couple of U.S. Marshals and an Oklahoma City cop shouting his name. And then they tell us, you got to get out of the building. There's a secondary explosive. And you can imagine you're torn because there's this guy still up here, but it's a secondary device. They're telling us you got to get out. So we get out of the building. We're running from the building. We run into an agent, and he says, and he's clearly upset. And I said, what's going on? He said, I left somebody alive in the building. And I turned around and we ran. As everybody's running away, we ran back. And some cops joined us, and that's Amy Downs. And in the documentary that you saw, that was reference to her, where she was buried in tons of rubble.
Oh, yeah.
We were down in the bowels of that building trying to get her out.
Which you eventually did. That was an amazing story.
She is an amazing person. She was an amazing person that day. As you can imagine, being buried in tons of rubble, can't move. I mean, for a lot of us, I think we would go into pure panic mode. She didn't. She remained calm. She was conversant. And during the time that we were trying to dig her out, she said, if you guys can get me out of here, I'll bake you some chocolate chip cookies. And 2 years later, I was talking to her and reminded her of that fact, and she said, I can't even imagine why I said that because I don't even know how to bake. So we got a good laugh out of it. We got a good laugh out of it, and now 30 years later, on the anniversary on April the 19th, I had in the mail I had a shipment of chocolate chip cookies.
Oh wow, that's great.
She found it. So
Took her a while.
We've been in took her a while. We've been in contact, and she has been an inspiration from that day on, and how she's carried out her life since then is an amazing story in itself. So that was again, I mean, tragedy but I think that the documentary came out at an important time because of the message. When you watch that and you see it in this powerful and graphic detail, the consequence of hate.
Yeah.
When you see that archived footage of those little children, panic-stricken, covered in blood, the children lost, the lives lost, the impact, the consequence of hate is front and center in that documentary. And then what that also tells us is that when consumed in hate, people lose trust in everything and everybody. And when you lose trust in everything and everybody, the enemy lurks around every corner.
Mm.
When you can imagine that McVeigh had somehow seen all of those aunts, uncles, grandmas, grandpas, moms and dads and kids in that building, he saw them as the enemy.
Yeah.
How does it happen? Well, it happens when you get consumed in hate and you lose trust in anything and everything. But the third part of the messaging that came from that documentary is the power of coming together. The power and importance of coming together was clear when, through the documentary and seeing the documentary, the importance of that. And I can't help but think about the construction worker. The tools of his trade were his wheelbarrow, his shovel, and his steel-toed boots. And he showed up at the perimeter that first day with his shovel, his wheelbarrow, his steel-toed boots, and handed them over so that a first responder might use them. That's the power of coming together. That's the power of everybody rallying and realizing that we have to come together right now. And,
yeah.
And so that message, I think, is an important part of that documentary. So it ended up that I had experience using computer offline searches to find people. I went into the command post on the 20th and asked about some names that I saw written on a wall, and they said that they were suspects, and I asked if anyone had done an offline search, and no one had, so I did, and it so happened that was the offline search that found McVeigh.
Wow.
I was on a helicopter as quickly as we found that out, and I flew up to Noble County to the courthouse, and then I ended up going up and putting eyes on McVeigh. And then I had an assignment up there to get booking photographs, to get the booking report, to make sure the evidence was all secured, find a place that he could be interviewed, make sure that the courthouse was secure and cordoned off, and so on and so forth. Russell, this is part of this whole. I guess I can refer to it as maybe a growing experience. It's so hard to kind of to pat yourself on the back after being involved in that kind of tragedy, seeing the kind of things that I saw that day, seeing the things that I saw the 2 years before in Waco, there's really no space to pat yourself on the back and say, you know what, you did good. You did the best you could. You did the best you could. You did good. It's just it's so hard to give yourself that space. Well, since the documentary has aired, I'm working on giving myself that space to be able to just say, you know, you did good. You were there that day. There was hundreds of other people that did good, even, you know, I mean, hundreds upon hundreds of people that did good that day, and you happen to be one of those people that did good. So it's just, like I said, it's kind of a growing experience, and I feel like I'm able to look back on it and reflect on it in different ways.
Yeah. That's really interesting, that perspective, because, yeah, I suppose a lot of people wouldn't think about the fact that when it's such a tragic event, it's hard to feel any kind of good feeling about doing your job. So another thing that I thought that was interesting about that whole series of events was how McVeigh was so sloppy in his planning that it almost seemed like he wanted to get caught. Does that seem accurate, or?
Well, I mean, you know, you have to look at this thing and say, well, how sloppy, you know, was he? There were some details that, number one, I'm thinking that he probably didn't realize how quickly that the CVN, the confidential VIN numbers on that truck were going to get traced and identify
Right.
where it got leased. And he'd leased it under an anonymous name, under this name of Kling. So he felt like he was backstopping himself. If it did get to there, then it's going to be this guy Kling who rented the truck and not McVeigh. So he was trying to protect himself there. What are the odds of him driving north on I-25 and getting pulled over by an Oklahoma Highway Patrol trooper? You know,
Right.
And so that was maybe a wink from God. Maybe that was coincidence, happenstance, whatever it was. And despite the odds, he was pulled over by Charlie Hanger. Then it all unraveled, and unraveled pretty quickly. So, kind of what you say, there's a certain amount of truth to that. That you got this numbnut who's consumed with hate has this mission to blow up these Americans doing their job in a federal building. So I guess you could attribute some if it's any kind of sloppiness to that. But the scary thing about it is, and that's why there are conspiracy theories and so on, is that it's hard for people to believe that one fella and a couple of compatriots were able to do this. That it was able to be done that easily, because it puts us at significant, considerable risk every day if it can be done that easily, and it was.
Right. He certainly never showed any remorse for it either, did he?
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
Knowing that kids died in there, he basically deemed them collateral damage. So there was no remorse, and the fact that you know, but that was his mission. And one of the things that, you know, that I feel like I learned in the FBI, learned along the way, is the fact that the most dangerous people are people without identity. Without identity. and they're seeking, searching, trying to find an identity, trying to find a place, trying to find peace, trying to find acceptance, all of those things that go with that. Koresh was the same.
Right.
Without identity, and he took up the identity of religion, of the prophet. McVeigh took up the identity of a revolutionary and was going to start a revolution. That became their identity.
Right.
And the people without identity are obviously and clearly the most dangerous.
So you've done a lot since your FBI career. What are some of the more satisfying jobs and you've been on boards and all kinds of stuff? What are some of the more satisfying positions you've held?
You know, I got to say, number one, being with the FBI was an incredible opportunity. It was everything that you can imagine, everything you can think of, hunting down bank robbers and fugitives, and I mean, just on and on of the things that I got to participate in. I was at the Rodney King riots. They flew us out there on a transport. I was in San Francisco during the Loma Prieta earthquake, and I mean, it's just one thing and another. I was assigned for a period of time the Zodiac Killer case. I worked on the Green River murder case. So you think about that, and you think, what could even come close to comparison, right?
Yeah.
Once I retired, we got a contract with the Office of Special Trustee at the Department of Interior. There were, I think at the time, 80,000 Native Americans that were owed some amount of money from the federal government that were deemed whereabouts unknown. And we got a contract to find those people. It was likened to a fugitive investigation, only these people wanted to be found. They were open. And it was the most incredible, satisfying experience of my career. And part of it was, and this was the really strange part, is I think we found 1,600 people worth $16 million.
Wow.
But what was the most satisfying thing is we conduct these investigations to find folks who their whereabouts were unknown, and most of the times their families had no idea where they were. And finding them, almost never did somebody say, "How much money am I owed?" They would say, "Did you run across my family when you were looking for me? Do you know who I am?" Because some were adopted at birth, some didn't. They didn't have a connection to their family. They wanted to know who they were. And we were able to tell them who they were, who their relatives were, and oftentimes connected them right up on the phone right then with a grandma, grandpa, or a mom.
Wow, that's amazing.
Oh, it was one of those kinds of things where at least once a week we all had a good cry, talking about one of the cases and realizing what we had done. And to this day, there are some folks who are now reconnected with their relatives, reconnected with the reservation, back on the reservation. Or I shouldn't say back on the reservation. They were now living on the reservation and part of the community, and it was because we were able to find them.
That's so cool. Yeah, I can see how that must have just been so satisfying.
It was incredibly amazing. And one quick story, this guy was down in Southern California, and he decided that he was going to move away for whatever reason, work or whatever it was, and he moved off, and he was pretty transient, living here, living there, moving around. Well, the family quickly lost track of him, and imagine this too is during a time before cell phones and this easy communication and social media and so on. So it was easier to lose track of somebody, where they end up. In the meantime, the family moved. His grandfather, his mother, and one of his siblings, that was his family base, they moved from Southern California and moved to Texas. Well, no Nobody knew where they went. So he went back home to visit his family at one point. He doesn't have any idea where they are. Completely disconnected from his family. We find him. Turns out he's in Oklahoma, and he asked that question: "Did you run across my family when you were looking for me?" He said, "As a matter of fact, we did." And I put him on the phone on a conference call with his grandfather down in Texas, and tears. I mean, they're crying. They're like, "Oh my God." And the grandfather said, "Well, give me your address. I'm getting in my truck right now, and your mom and I are coming to get you." And they drove up there and connected with him in Oklahoma.
Wow.
So yeah, that's oddly enough, in comparison to all the stuff in the FBI, that was the most satisfying, gratifying thing that I've done in my career.
Yeah, I can see why. So, just in general, I moved back to Montana in 2007, and I was pretty stunned to find that the conditions on the reservations here are still pretty bad. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about what Native communities can do, or what the government can do, or what anybody can do to help with that situation.
So one thing that I want to go back to and mention is when I was on the Wind River, and I mentioned that Winnie Big Road was I don't like to say babysitter, because that sort of takes away from what she really meant to us. Mm-hmm. After us, and I had this reoccurring dream, and in this dream, and I'm not trying to get all mystical on us or anything, but in this dream, I was about probably 8 years old. I was in this meadow, and I'm looking towards the mountains, and I hear these voices calling for grandson, calling to, and I'm thinking it must be calling to me. I'm the only one in the dream, and as I was trying to answer, I'd wake up. And so this dream occurred and reoccurred a few times. And one morning, my mom was already gone to work. Winnie was there. I woke up, and I went in and I told her. I said, "Winnie," I said, I had this dream, and it doesn't scare me, but this is what the dream was. And I told her, and she said, and she always had a Winston cigarette hanging out of her mouth, and she's smoking that Winston. She goes, "My boy," she said, "you've got a gift. That's what that dream is telling you, is you have a gift." She said, "I don't know what it is. You may not know what it is for a very long time, and maybe you'll never know what it is, but you have a gift." And that stuck with me always. And it stayed with me, and I always felt, because of her telling me that, I always felt a little bit different. Always, in different circumstances, different things I was doing, I always felt I just felt a little bit different. And so it wasn't until I was in San Francisco, and it's not to go into a whole long story because I know our time is running short, but there was, out of 4 million people, that city had swelled to 4 million people in a day. I had a lead where this guy had used a payphone 6 months before. I went out looking for him. I got out of the car, I walked half a block, I turned left and went half a block, and he walked right by me, and I arrested him. Then I realized what the gift was. The gift was this. So imagine that we all have, every one of us, has blood memory, has genetic memory. So just imagine this, my great uncle, Mountain Chief, and he was a son of Mountain Chief, into the late 1870s, he was battling other tribes on horseback. Still subsistence hunting, living by observation, keen observation, recognizing what's around him, his surroundings, and knowing what those surroundings are every day. And that's how he survived, by observation and a bent blade of grass, a smell in the air, the moisture in the air, a cloud over the mountain. All those things were things that factored in, and he saw every day, even without seeing them, right? Well, I realized that and here's the thing that's really strange about this is we see history as some far off thing, He died only 12 years before I was born. He told stories of his battles on horseback, and he carried a limp after a battle with the Crow until his death in 1942. But he told those stories to my grandpa Ed Goldberg. So it wasn't that long ago, and that blood memory, that genetic memory is still fresh. I realized today after arresting that guy, because it happened that I was so often in the right place at the right time, and I realized that what my gift was being able to allow that blood memory, that genetic memory, was to allow it to guide me and direct me. And that was where I ended up, and for me it was all about being in the right place at the right time and being able to do the right thing. And it's, it's what we all have, and it's instinct and intuition. And that instinct and intuition is, it's there for all of us, but it's only being able to allow it to guide us and direct us and to put us in a direction.
Right. Listen to the voice, basically.
Yep. I hate to call it a voice because then I really sound crazy. I'm listening to the voice.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you want to add?
Well, I really appreciate you reaching out to me and asking me to sit down and visit with you today. I also have realized that I didn't want to do the interviews for the documentaries. There was 2 documentaries. A Nat Geo documentary. It was a 3-part series on the Oklahoma City bombing. Then there was the Netflix documentary. And I, on the front end, I declined to be interviewed and talked to about them. I didn't want to do it for a number of reasons, but I ended up doing it. And now what I've realized, and I call myself a reluctant elder, but as a reluctant elder, I realize the importance of just one young person seeing that Native guy on documentaries might help change a career trajectory. And I want to go back to the question you asked me about life on the reservation and so on and so forth. All too often we focus on the negative, the things that are going on that are not pleasant. But what we oftentimes fail to think about and fail to recognize is the beauty of the life on a reservation that's there. The connection to our relatives, being amongst relatives, being on the very ground that our ancestors hunted and lived on and enjoyed. We are blessed in so many ways, and we have such a beautiful existence in so many ways, that what we have to do and need to continue to do is appreciate that blessing we have, and make that the focus, and not make the focus the tragedy and the horrible things that can sometimes happen.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Walter. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and I'll look forward to being in touch. And as a historian, right? You probably have a tremendous amount of knowledge and background of the folks of Montana. So maybe we'll have a conversation about that one day, and some of my relatives from days gone by.
I want to thank Walter Lamar for joining me today. I also want to thank my son Fletcher for providing the musical transitions. And thank you for listening to the Song of Roland. The documentary we referenced a few times during this interview is called Oklahoma City Bombing: American Terror, and you can find that on Netflix.